Have you ever thought that you nailed your exposure when taking a photo, only to realise when you got back to your computer that it's either under or overexposed and not quite as you remember capturing it? Well, I know I have on multiple occasions, and it's often left me scratching my head trying to figure out if I've made a mistake or something like that. So in this video, I'm going to be going over several reasons why this might happen and some ways of correcting it to make sure we can get the best possible results at the time of capture. So I recently made a video about exposing to the right and why I tend not to do it all of the time, but why it's good practice in certain situations. And I think my main concern is that I like to be sure that I'm preserving my highlight detail and not losing any information. And the main reason for my cautious approach, if you will, is that I often see a discrepancy between my camera's histogram and what I see when I import my photos into Lightroom. Quite often, those two histograms don't match up, and that could lead to either under or overexposure. Now, in order for me to explain this correctly, I just need to touch on a few points that you may already know, but please just bear with me for a second or two because it all makes a little bit more sense if I explain this first. So first, whenever we look at the viewfinder or the LCD on a mirrorless camera, you see the selected JPEG profile, not the raw image. Now for me as a Fuji user, that could be either Velvia or Pro Negative Standard. If you're a Nikon user, for example, it could be Standard, Neutral, or I think Vivid. And there's many more, depending on which camera brand that you have. Now, these JPEG profiles have a baked-in edit applied to them to make them look the way that they do. And typically they are more contrasty, have more saturation and sharpness than the raw file. So obviously you might see a massive difference between the picture profile histogram on your camera and when you import your raw image into Lightroom and look at the histogram in Lightroom, because the raw is stripped of those JPEG adjustments, meaning the histogram will be completely different. This is important because if, like me, and you expose your photos based on your LCD and histogram, then using a very contrasty picture profile like Velvia or Vivid could lead you into making incorrect exposure adjustments at the time of capture. So if your camera supports it, I would consider choosing a natural preview. Now my camera here has a setting called Natural Live View, which strips away any of those JPEG profiles and gives you a very flat looking image, which is similar to the raw file. So if your camera has something similar, I would definitely consider using this setting, as you'll find the histogram on your camera on the LCD will better represent the raw file, which will make over and under exposure more easy to manage. So this definitely helps to get the correct exposure at the time of capture, and that is definitely the most important thing. But you will likely see a difference when you actually import your photo into Lightroom, which is just another variable that we've got to deal with. Now, the reason for this difference is that Lightroom applies a profile, and by default it applies Adobe Color. Now, whenever I'm starting an edit, I take a look at the different Adobe profiles to see how they affect the shot before I start my edit. I usually go with either Adobe Color, Standard, or Landscape, but they will all look different from the original capture. And the reason for this is that these profiles already have adjustments made to them. So it's like Lightroom is pre-editing your raw file for you before you even get a chance to actually look at the original file. And that isn't always ideal. So I think there's a couple of solutions for trying to get your camera histogram to match your Lightroom histogram, which is going to give us more consistent results. So at the time of capturing the photo, I can choose a picture profile or film simulation and then add the same profile to the raw file in Lightroom. So say I shot the image in Provia, then in Lightroom I can go down to the camera profiles and select Provia, which will apply the same film simulation to the raw file. So theoretically, the look and exposure of the raw file should be the same as the JPEG that we captured in camera, meaning the two histograms should be identical, which would help to give us consistency. The downside to this is that you're adding a look to your raw file that might not work for the edit that you had in mind. And if that's the case, you can try this next option. So this next step is a little bit more tricky, but we're going to try to match the JPEG profile on the camera with one of the Adobe profiles, such as Adobe Color or Adobe Landscape in Lightroom. So how do we do this? Well, it's just a case of testing, really. And again, I'm going to select my standard picture profile in camera. In my case, that's Provia. And then I'm going to take a photo of something that's got plenty of saturation and contrast. And then I'm going to take a photo of the LCD, the histogram, on my phone, so we can use that as a reference. Now, when we get the image into Lightroom, we'll be able to compare the histogram, the one that was on the camera and the one that's in Lightroom. Now, if we're seeing a big difference between how the histograms compare, we may be able to change a few settings in camera to help match the two a bit better. So many cameras give you the ability to change the contrast of the selected JPEG profile or film simulation. So on my Fuji X-S10 here, I can change the tone curve, the color and sharpness of my JPEG, which of course will change how the histogram appears. And remember, we're trying to match the camera's histogram with one of the Adobe Color profiles. This will be a massive help the next time that you're exposing a bright scene. And this is actually my most preferred method because it gives me a nice image to work with in the field on the LCD, and I prefer working with either Adobe Color or Landscape as a base to start my edits in Lightroom. So there is another option which might be worth a look. So Tony Kuiper has developed a set of linear profiles for Lightroom that are camera specific. So you can download them for your camera, and they're all different. So you just need to select your camera model. Now, these profiles are completely free. Tony's made these completely free, but what he has done is essentially provided a Lightroom profile that has a flat tone curve, meaning when you select this camera specific profile in Lightroom or Camera Raw, you're seeing something very close to the actual RAW file that you captured, as opposed to your RAW file having Lightroom's adjustments added to them. And this means that the histogram in Lightroom is now very close to the histogram at the time of capture if you were using something like Natural Live View as opposed to the JPEG profile. Now, this linear profile is a lot flatter than any of the Adobe profiles, so it does require a lot more editing. Now, I'm not going to sit here and try to give you any technical details about how these linear profiles are made or what they do, because there's lots of information on Tony's website, along with instructions on how to use them and install them. But yeah, they are definitely worth a try. I think it actually makes exposing to the right a little bit easier in some situations. So let's head out onto the shores of the wonderful Loch Marie for a quick couple of photos I captured during a rather delightful evening in the Northwest Highlands of Scotland. But just before we get on to that, I just wanted to say a massive thanks to everyone who has picked up a copy of my ebook over the last few weeks. It really is much appreciated and it helps to support this channel. If you haven't checked it out, it's all about landscape photography composition. It has over 200 photos and 120 pages crammed full of tips and tricks. The link to that is down in the video description. Anyway, let's get to the wonderful Loch Marie. So it was a beautifully calm evening on the shores of the wonderful Loch Marie, and after a bit of scouting I came across a few lone Scots pine trees that really caught my eye. The dappled light was amazing, so I composed this shot in a way that the trees stood out from the mountains in the background, and it was just a case of waiting for the right moment. After spending a while on that last photo, I moved around to the end of the peninsula and captured another photo, but this time looking down the loch, showing a little more of those wonderful views. So a big thanks if you made it this far. I do hope you enjoyed this video, or you got some information from it. I absolutely love shooting those lone Scots pines, especially during such tranquil conditions. Anyway, the video up here will take you to another one of my landscape photography adventures. And if you'd like to support what I do, then please do consider checking out my landscape photography tours and ebooks. The link for that is up there and also down in the video description. Hope to see you all again next week.